Twitter and Elon Musk have been making the news a lot over the last few weeks, really ever since Elon announced that he was going to be trying to acquire the company for $44 billion, and the saga that was the acquisition, all through to him bringing in a sink into the headquarters after he did end up purchasing the company. But the last few days has been really interesting from a workforce standpoint, from a operations standpoint, really, when you think about what's happening at Twitter and all the feuds that are happening between workers and Elon and all the firings mixed in with all the layoffs. So it really is just this kind of culmination of a lot of different things going on. But what we wanted to do here was just kind of pick apart some of the workforce elements, some of the employer branding elements, some of the kind of just labor elements that we think about a lot here at Daggerfinn. I had a really interesting conversation earlier today with James Phillip, who really kind of brought to my attention this idea that, you know, if Elon is able to pull this off and he's able to turn around Twitter and you know, remove parts of the company that he doesn't like and put in parts of the company that he feels like are, or that kind of look, smell, and feel a little bit more like the efficiencies that he can find at SpaceX and Tesla to achieve the things that those two companies have achieved. Is this the greatest, or one of the greatest, you know, American business turnaround stories of all time? And that got my head spinning a little bit, because I hadn't thought of it that way. I had definitely been following a lot of the news, but the idea that, you know, that there could be a disconnect between the narrative that the media is telling, which is that there's this, you know, implosion or explosion that's happening at the company, and what could end up coming from the tail end of it. It's just interesting to think about. So a couple of details I say. So Elon Musk has acquired Twitter for $44 billion. In the last couple of weeks, they've announced layoffs to probably nearly half of their workforce. You know, there's been talk of Elon overcutting and then having to call people back in. Whether or not that's true, who knows? In the last few days, there have been lots of feuds with individuals who've been let go from Twitter, kind of bashing the company, and then, or even engineers at the company who were employed bashing Elon and his, you know, his tactics, and then, you know, maybe getting fired over Twitter. These kind of things have all been happening. But at a more macro level, I think, and we've talked about this a lot on this channel, COVID and the pandemic and lockdowns and all the things that were really disruptive to organizational development, organizational culture, are really showing up in what's happening here at Twitter. You know, James and I talked a little bit about what would happen at some of his portfolio companies if you know, if a mandate came into where everybody had to go back into the office, and would it look a lot like Twitter in terms of the backlash and the pushback? And it's hard to answer, but it raises the question, which is what happened to you know, the American workforce over the last 24 months to where you know, we've got to a place where it's okay to not be as productive or as efficient. I'll put a pin in that point because I'll come back to it in a minute. The last 12 months, 18 months, companies have seen their earnings skyrocket. You know, as a function of inflation, as a function of inflated demand, whatever it is. And with that, you know, when people see their companies doing well, typically then wages go up because people will say, hey, we need to be rewarded for this top line number. And with that, you know, that's okay in a time when everything is booming. And so there's this kind of, you know, I want to reap all the rewards on the way up. And when things are kind of falling apart a little bit, I'm not in for that. I'm not part of the team at that point. I'm not going to, you know, batten down the hatches and just kind of help the company survive. And you get a little bit of that sense with what's happening at Twitter. You know, the times were good, and if it's true that advertisers are all pulling out and you know, this company is on the brink of I mean, there's like an existential question that's happening at Twitter. How does it look from a from a camaraderie or a culture standpoint that people just aren't willing to batten down the hatches a little bit. I think a lot of the time there's the message and the messenger can get a little bit muddy. I think a lot, when from a high level strategy standpoint, I think when the company is struggling, cutting costs is normal, right? And doing the things that you need to do to make sure that there's still a viable company at the end of the day is very normal. We see this across all sorts of companies right now, but none of them really get the backlash that Twitter is getting. And I think a lot of that, of course, is the messenger being Elon Musk and how polarizing he is as a character. But there is something to be said for Twitter as a canary in the coal mine as it relates to even just the U.S. economy in general. What Twitter is having to do right now is something that a lot of companies are having to do. So why is it such a big issue, right? And I think Andy Jassy, the CEO of Amazon, came out just a day or two ago saying that the cuts that they've made, which is 11,000 people, is just the start, right? There's, I think we were tracking one of the charts at Daggerfinn, kind of looking at Amazon's growth. I think it was a statistic chart, and just making a prediction on where this would land after all the layoffs were done at Amazon. And in an earlier conversation with James, I think we were talking like, okay, James is thinking six figures here. That's how many jobs are going to be lost at Amazon as they track back down to around 2020, 2019 growth levels. And it's probably true. There's probably between 100,000 and maybe even 150,000 jobs that could be lost at that company. And so, 11,000 is really just 10% of what might be happening at that company. And even Sundar Pichai at Google has mentioned that they need to be more efficient. They need to be more productivity minded, and they need to be thinking about costs a little bit more in order to survive a downturn. And if venture capitalists and capital allocators are telling their portfolio companies, look, you need 18 to 24 months of runway, the U.S. economy is probably in a world of hurt over the next 2 years, or at least 1 year. Let's call it that. And companies doing what they need to do from a fiduciary standpoint to make sure that they're still viable, I think is reasonable. So there's kind of like the high level strategy, corporate strategy standpoint. But kind of going back to the point earlier, which is what the effects of COVID did to workplace culture. There's a thought that I'm trying to synthesize, and in conversations with James and other individuals, I think we're thinking about a little bit more, which is what is happening at Twitter, what is really occurring across all organizations, but because there's a lack of, I wouldn't call it governance, but a lack of, you can call it management, or just like there's a little bit of upheaval at Twitter that maybe isn't happening at other companies. I mean, I know I'm kind of intimately familiar with one of our clients at Daggerfinn, and kind of just the amount of work that goes into keeping the workplace happy at the moment and functional. Is what is happening at Twitter what would happen at all companies if we just tried to get back to 2019? And I've definitely seen quotes from management consultants. I think they're plastered all over LinkedIn, where it's like, okay, if you're thinking normal is 2019, like think again. And then that's probably true. But we do get the feeling that there are days where you feel like you're a little bit over our skis as an American economy and as an American workforce, where there's so much disruption going on. There's the union strikes, or the strikes at Starbucks where workers are trying to unionize. These are all conversations that speak to worker power, right? They're like the pendulum has swung over the last 24 months strongly in favor of workers as a function of the lack of liquidity in the labor force, or in the open job market at least. And is there a case to be made that, look, Twitter is really just like the snow globe that we can all look at and say, okay, that's what will happen if we, rein in a little bit, or if we kind of remove the controls. And so if you say, okay, well, that might be the case. Well, if Elon Musk is able to turn around Twitter and make it a profitable company and make it kind of this story that fits in the narrative of a Tesla or a SpaceX, then do we get to a point where it's like, okay, well, look at what Twitter did, and look at how Elon achieved that. And as fiduciaries and as kind of managers and executives across all companies, then are you able then to say, okay, well, that's what needs to happen, and that gives everybody a little bit of a reason or cloud cover to do the things that I think I hear a lot about in terms. I hear a lot from executives and in those conversations that they want to do, right? Which is fight the lack of productivity or the declining productivity and get creativity back up by getting everybody back into the workplace and getting everybody back together again. And there's things that I think there's rumblings of the disconnect between staff and the executives and the executives wanting to push back to where there's a little bit more visibility into what's happening on the day-to-day, so that you can gauge true productivity. And if Elon is able to do this and turn that company around, then does that mean everybody else can say, okay, like let's do that then, and let's deal with the uproar and the upheaval, knowing that the rainbow or the light at the end of the tunnel is a better company, maybe. And I think that's an interesting thing to play with from if you're just kind of thinking of a thought experiment. But so then, the thought there is, okay, Twitter is the canary in the coal mine for companies, and then, pull that out even further. And this is just kind of a very quick thought that James and I were talking about in our last conversation, which is then, are we playing with human dynamics to where, if you look at China and their zero COVID policy, it looks eerily similar to kind of what we were dealing with here in the United States, where when we were locked down, people wanted lockdowns to end. And then it seems like now that we're not locked down, everybody seems to want to work at home. Not everybody, but I generalize, but a lot of people want to work at home. So you have this kind of like human nature kind of thing where you want the thing that you can't get, or you want the grass is always greener. That kind of dynamic, and then is Twitter a proxy or a canary in the coal mine for companies, and then is the U.S. economy a proxy for the rest of the world, or a canary in the coal mine for the rest of the world? And I think these are all just interesting things to play with, but what's happening at Twitter, I think, begs the question: what does the future of the American workforce look like? And it's something that we'll continue to explore, and I'm really just kind of gathering my thoughts right now. So let me know what you think in the comments below. What is happening at Twitter normal? Is this just the kind of reflection of what needs to happen when you try and break a culture? Which I think is probably true, but is the end goal here a better company? Who knows? Let me know what you think.